So we're continuing through our series on Melbourne's top 10 objections or issues with Christianity. We've gone through the city, we've surveyed 100 people, and we've got people's objections and issues. We've looked at the number 10 objection, Christianity is too judgmental. Last week was number 9, you can't take the Bible literally. Tonight we're going to be looking at the number 8 objection, that Christianity is irrelevant. I struggled a little bit with this as a topic because it kind of assumes that Christianity is false. If Christianity was true, it's of course very relevant. So to say Christianity is irrelevant is assuming it's false, and I kind of want to know why people think it's false. What makes it so implausible to people? So this week I tried to assume essentially what we saw in the video, that the only truth that matters is truth about life before death. So assume there is no life after death. Assume this is the life we have, and after you die you rot and that's it. What is Christianity relevant for then? What is Christianity if not pie in the sky when you die, to put it like that? How is it that we have, as Jesus says, life and life to the full? In John chapter 10, verse 10. Thinking about that, I thought there's actually quite a number of ways that Christianity is relevant for our life here and now. And tonight I want to focus on, I guess, the big three, the three main ones that we spend most of our time doing, the way that it's relevant to really everyone. And that's how it's relevant for our work, how it's relevant for our relationships, and finally how it's relevant for day-to-day life. The daily grind, the travelling, the cooking, the cleaning, those kind of things. Because really, we spend most of our waking hours doing those things. We spend a lot of our waking hours at work. When we're not at work, we're in relationships with family and friends and romances. And if not those things, then it's day-to-day life. So first of all, let me have a look at how Christianity is relevant for our work. Now, the way people have approached work over the recent decades has changed fairly significantly. In decades past, people used to choose their work, choose their vocation, often because of the good of the work itself. Whereas now, people are choosing work more and more because of the good that it can bring to them. So when Christianity was more influential in the West, people used to become a doctor in order to save lives, because it's a good thing to do, to heal people, to help people. Whereas now more and more people are going into medicine for money, for the status, for the acclaim. People used to go into law because of justice, in order to protect the innocent, in order to bring the guilty to justice. Whereas now more and more people are going into law for the prestige of being a lawyer. People used to go into journalism for the pursuit of truth, so that people would know the truth, so the news could be spread. But now it's more about climbing the ladder. It's about having influence. It's about getting to the top. Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, he sees the point quite well. He was a preacher in England in the last century, died the year before I was born. He puts it like this. He says, "There are many whom I have had the privilege of meeting whose tombstones might well bear the grim epitaph, 'Born a man, died a doctor.'" Someone's born a man, but when they become a doctor, that being a doctor kind of consumes them. More and more people are seeing their whole identity in their work. And so when you meet someone, quite often the first question you say is, "What do you do?" And then that enables you to put them in a category in your mind. This is them, that's what they do. I know who they are now. This is more and more common for men. We quite often categorize people by what they do. Women often, this is a generalization, but women tend to categorize people more by their relationships. So the person's a father or a sister or a mother or whatever. Men tend to think of people in terms of what they do. Either way, it's quite a big way in which we see our identity is in our work. So how is Christianity relevant for our work? How would you see Christianity? How would you see work differently if you're a Christian rather than if you weren't a Christian? I want to suggest 4 ways in which Christianity is relevant for work. They're the 4 points on your outline under this first point. First of all, it gives you a new identity without which work will sink you, a new concept of dignity without which work will bore you, a new moral compass without which we'll be lost, and a new motive for work without which we'll be slaves. So let's look at the first one, a new identity without which work will sink you. You see, if your identity is in your work, if that's who you are, if you're not a man but a doctor, then if you succeed in your career, it'll go to your head. But if you fail in your career, it'll go to your heart. If your whole identity is in that career, then it's everything to you. Ben Nugent is a writer in the States. He puts it like this. Writing a book consists largely of avoiding distractions. If you can forget your real circumstances and submerge yourself in your subject for hours every day, characters become more human, sentences become clearer and prettier. But when good writing was my only goal, I made the quality of my work the measure of my worth. Hear that? The quality of my work, the measure of my worth. For this reason, I wasn't able to read my own writing well. I couldn't tell whether something I had just written was good or bad because I needed it to be good in order to feel sane. See, if the quality of your work is the measure of your worth, then you can't measure it accurately. You need it to be good. You can't tell if it's good or bad. It has to be good. If you put all your eggs in the basket of career, it has to do well, or it will destroy you. It will sink you. And so when the global financial crisis hit, for those who were hit hard and for those their whole identity was in their work, their career, that just got sunk. It didn't just sink their career, it sank them. That's why many committed suicide following the global financial crisis. When you're so driven to do well in your career, everything else comes second. You put family and friends, relationships, time, spend hours and hours in the office, and it doesn't in the end bring you fulfillment because you're always looking up. You're always looking at the next promotion, the next step, the next rung on the corporate ladder. If you have your identity in Christ, you're no longer looking up at the next rung. You know exactly who you are. If your career gets sunk, it won't sink you because your identity is in Him, not in your career. It gives you a new identity without which work can sink you. Secondly, it gives you a new concept of dignity without which work will bore you. You see, if like most, you work for reputation, fulfillment, consumption, then work, it kind of becomes a necessary evil. It's like a chore. It's something you have to do for your financial means or your reputation or your fulfillment. It's not something you enjoy. But if you're a Christian, you can approach work as cultivating God's good creation. God has created the world good, and He has created us to work, to fill and subdue His good creation. Tim Keller puts it like this. This pattern is found in all kinds of work. Farming takes the physical material of soil and seed and produces food. Music takes the physics of sound and rearranges it into something beautiful and thrilling that brings meaning to life. When we take a fabric and make a piece of clothing, when we push a broom and clean up a room, when we use technology to harness the forces of electricity, when we take an unformed, naive human mind and teach it a subject, when we teach a couple how to resolve their relational disputes, when we take simple materials and turn them into a poignant work of art, we are continuing God's work of forming, filling, and subduing. See, it's reordering God's good creation. This changes your whole approach to work. It's no longer just a means to some other end. It's a good in and of itself. It's reordering God's good creation. It has value. It has dignity in and of itself. It gives you a new concept of dignity without which work can bore you and be a chore. Thirdly, it gives us a new moral compass without which we'll be lost. You see, unless you're working for a non-profit organisation, the bottom line of the organisation is going to be profit margins. It kind of has to be able to compete. But the trouble is, if the bottom line is a profit margin, it's very, very easy to step on people in order to maximise profits. The people who basically were handling the subprime mortgages that essentially led to the global financial crisis, they, at the time, weren't aware of any immoral action on their behalf. See, if something is legal and everyone else is doing it, then the only question is, what's going to make more money? If it's legal and everyone else is doing it, then the only compass points them to a bigger profit margin. Many of you would have seen or heard at least about The Wolf on Wall Street, a movie, Leonardo DiCaprio, basically about a guy who stepped on a lot of people in order to get a lot of money, very famously. This film is based on the real life of this man, Jordan Belfort. He was on The Project last week, and people questioned him about does he have any regrets about stepping on people in order to get all the money that he got. And he kept repeating again and again, the mistake I made was losing my ethical way. He said this several times, and I kind of wondered, where do you get your ethical way? He said he lost it as if he had one beforehand. Where do you get your ethical way? Like, they don't kind of teach you in business school. You don't get the job and they say, okay, now here's the ethical way. If Christianity is so irrelevant, then who decides what's moral? How do you decide what's moral? So in the corporate world, we treat people differently. We have words for different people to enable us to treat people differently. So some people are customers, some people are clients, some are employees, employers, suppliers, shareholders, contacts. It enables you to have a different financial value for different people. I remember there was a woman who went from the corporate world into ministry. And she was working with a pastor, and she was talking to him about her contacts in the city. And the pastor said, you're in ministry now. We don't call them contacts. We call them people. Because they're people. We're all made in the image of God. We don't treat people differently because we see them as clients or suppliers or shareholders or contacts. This gives you a new moral compass without which we'll be lost. Fourthly, it gives us a new motive for work without which we'll be slaves. See, most people, when they enter the workforce, we're basically like sheep. We get into an industry and we just get up the ladder. You get in and you get up the ladder. That's where you get more successful. You go up the ladder because it's more successful the further and further you go. And that drive, that need to prove yourself, to make it to get the next promotion and the next and move up the ladder, it becomes a work underneath the work. There's the work that you do 9 to 5, but then there's the drive that's always there, that's always pushing you, that's always motivating you to get further and further. It's a work underneath the work. And so when you take time off, when you have holidays, it's still there, the need to prove yourself. You have work underneath your rest. That work underneath the work and underneath the rest is exactly what Jesus frees us from. We no longer need to have work underneath the work. We can have rest underneath the work. We can have rest underneath our rest. We no longer have to prove ourselves. You see, when Ben Nugent says, when good writing was my only goal, I made the quality of my work the measure of my worth. That is not true of a Christian. The measure of a Christian's worth is the quality of God's work on the cross on his behalf. You are worth so much that Jesus sent his son to die for you. It can never be reduced to the quality of your work. You see, when Jesus called the disciples, it was at a time of financial gain. Jesus showed them where there were all these fish, and they caught this massive load of fish. That's the kind of amount that you could sell and buy more nets and bigger boats, increase your fishing enterprise. But Jesus calls them to leave everything they have. And they do. They're not controlled by the need to be fishermen. So Jesus calls them to be fishers of men. If you work for reputation and fulfillment and consumption, you'll be a slave to it. But Jesus frees us to work for the good of creation, the good of the community, the good of the kingdom. Christianity is extremely relevant for our work. But it's not only relevant for work, it's relevant for our relationships. You see, while we spend most of our time at work, we spend most of our headspace thinking about relationships. It's the things that we write stories about, movies about. It's the thing that we sing songs about, write poems about, invent social media for, so that we can have more relationships, hear about how more people are going. People are fundamentally relational. We're very much social creatures. No one disagrees with that. But that doesn't mean that relationships make us happy. It means that our happiness depends on how well our relationships are going. We really feel relational breakdown. When you're having a fight with someone, if you're going through a breakup or a divorce, if you're at war with someone, you really feel that. These are the kind of things that keep us up at night. And because relationships are so powerful, then like work, we can elevate it to a point where we need it to be happy, or de-elevate it to a means that for some other end. We can have too high a view, where we kind of make it like an idol, or too low a view, where it's just a means to some other ends. We quite often do that with relationships we have with our families, with our friends, but I think even more relevant to our culture is with romance. Our culture kind of sees romance as this magical or mystical thing. And you can see that by the way our culture tells stories. So one of the few stories that was written about friendship is The Lord of the Rings. It's essentially a fellowship where a group of friends are united for a common cause. If you read the books of The Lord of the Rings, the romance between Aragorn and Eowyn is in an appendix at the end. It's a footnote to the story. It's not part of the story, it's just at the end. He's kind of an aside. But what does Hollywood do when they make a movie out of it? They put it front row and center. They have this Hollywood. This is what sells movies. This is what our culture is obsessed about. Making films about romance. You see, as our culture gets less and less religious, we get more and more obsessed with romance and romantic relationships. To the point where some social commentators are saying that our culture is more obsessed with romance than any other culture in history. Listen to this. This is what an atheist author, Ernest Becker, says. He wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book called The Denial of Death, where he puts it like this. We now see how modern people have put themselves in an impossible situation. Modern people still need to feel our lives matter in the grand scheme of things. We still need to feel that there's some higher meaning. Writing as an atheist, he says, but if we no longer believe in God, how do we do that? One of the first ways that occurred to modern people was the romantic solution. The self-glorification that we used to get in our inmost being from a relationship with God, we now look for in a love partner. The lover becomes a way to fulfill one's very life. The worth and meaning comes from the loved one. The romantic option is an ingenious and creative attempt, but it is a lie that fails. It must fail. What is it we want when we elevate the love partner to this position? We want redemption, nothing less. We want to be rid of our faults. We want to be rid of our feelings of nothingness. We want redemption. We want to be justified by our love partner. We want to know that our existence is not in vain. So we turn to the love partner for validation. We expect the love partner to make us good and real through his or her love. Needless to say, human beings can never do this. You see what he's saying there? We want to know our existence is not in vain. So we turn to romance. People crave meaning, purpose. When you realize something is pointless, you stop doing it. People don't really function well without purpose. And so if we're not getting our purpose from God, we'll turn to the romantic solution. We'll turn to relationships. But don't you see, this is exactly what he's saying won't work. Human beings can never do this. If you go into a relationship with all of your hopes and dreams riding on it, then it'll be crushed by the weight of your expectation. You're less likely to get a relationship if this is something that describes you, because you'll come across as needy and desperate. If you don't get the relationship, then you'll be miserable because it's all of your hopes and dreams are putting into it. If you do get it, then you'll only be happy when the relationship goes well. And the person will be crushed by the weight of expectation that they simply can't live up to. You see, underneath this is a very deep desire in us, not just to be loved, but to be known and loved. You see, you could tell me that you love me. Sure. You don't even know me, but you love me, okay.
We love each other.
Well, you know me a little bit, Steve, so that means a bit more. My wife really knows me. She sees my flaws, my failures, my mistakes day after day, and there are so many. And so when she says she loves me, it is so critical. It means everything. When someone really knows you, knows all your flaws and all your failings, and then they say they love you, that is magical. Our culture knows this. This is the kind of thing that people exploit in movies. So a few years ago, there was a film, The Fisher King, with Robin Williams, and he plays a homeless man, and he pursues this woman here, Lydia. It's a romantic comedy, so they go out on a date. They come back, and Lydia says to him, "I had a wonderful time. I never want to see you again." He says, "What?" And she says, "Well, you see, this is how it works. We'll exchange phone numbers and you'll leave. I'll go to work and I'll feel so good for one day. Then you won't call. And then you won't call again. Then you'll never call, and ever so slowly I'll turn into a piece of dirt. I don't even know why I'm putting myself through this tonight. It was very nice to meet you. Goodbye." He says, wait. I have a confession to make." She says, "You're married." He says, "No." She says, "You're divorced." He says, "No. Here's my confession. I already know all about you. And not just from tonight. I know you hate your job. I know you don't have many friends. I know you feel uncoordinated. I know you don't feel as wonderful as everybody else. I know all about you, but I love you. And I think you're the greatest thing since spice racks. I would be happy to be knocked out several times if I could just have that first kiss, and I won't be distant, and I'll always call if you'll let me." She says, "Are you real?" See, that strikes a chord with us, doesn't it? For someone to know us like that, to someone to know all of our failings, all of our flaws, and still love us, that is incredibly powerful. We need to be loved with all of our flaws exposed. We need to be naked and not ashamed in front of someone. Not just physically naked, but personally. The only place you get that, the only place where you get love with all of your flaws exposed, is in the gospel, where we see that we are more wicked than we dared believe and more loved than we dared hope at the same time. This frees us to have relationships for the sake of relationships, not for the sake of ourselves, for our own need. It frees us to not crush others with the weight of our expectation, not to need to be built up, but to be able to build others up. That's incredibly attractive. It's incredibly healthy. Christianity is incredibly relevant for our work, for our relationships, and finally for our day-to-day life. Now, this is a kind of a hard category to think about what's relevant for day-to-day life because it's so broad. It's basically everything. But the speech that we heard earlier by David, this man here, David Foster Wallace, he's basically trying to pull graduates from thinking about their careers to thinking about daily life and what daily life consists of. This is water. That's what the speech is called. Part of his speech that didn't make it into the video and that really copped a lot of flack from other atheists was when he said this. This is him speaking as an atheist author. "In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice you get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of real God to worship, like Jesus or Allah or Yahweh or the wicked mother goddess, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you really tap meaning in life, then you'll never have enough. You'll never feel you have enough. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before the end. Worship power, and you will end up feeling weak and afraid, and you will need ever more and more power over others to numb you to your own fear. Worship your intellect. This is an academic speaking. Worship your intellect. Live for being seen as smart, and you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. But the insidious thing about all these forms of worship is they're unconscious. They are default settings. This is what he's trying to pull people out of. Don't let them be unconscious. Know them. See, what he's saying is very, very perceptive. Our day-to-day life is always shaped by what we're living for, by our hopes and our dreams, our fears and our nightmares. He says there's no such thing as atheism. Everybody worships. Everybody's living for something. If you say, no, I'm not going to live for anything, I'm going to be completely independent, that's not going to be me, then you're living for independence and detachment. There's no way to not live for something. The human heart always finds something to live for, something to worship. And he says the insidious thing is that this is unconscious. This is our default setting. Denial won't help you. You'll be living for something, you just won't be aware of it. Either way, it's still going to eat you alive. Listen very, very carefully. This is an atheist talking. He says, the compelling reason for choosing some sort of real God to worship, like Jesus or Allah or Yahweh or the wicked mother goddess, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. You see how relevant Christianity is. If you live for a career, it won't fulfill you. It'll just leave you wanting more, the next step, the next promotion. And if it sinks, then you sink with it. If you live for romance, then you will crush the other person with the weight of your expectation. And if you don't get it, then you'll always be miserable. If you live for human approval, you'll always be needy. You'll always need to be affirmed by someone. And criticism will kill you. Let me go one further than David Foster Wallace. If you live for Allah, or Vishnu, or the wicked mother goddess, then one of two things will happen to you. Either you'll work hard and you'll look down on everyone else who doesn't, or you'll fall into sin and you will be crushed by guilt. You see, if your religious obedience is the thing that gives you meaning and worth, then how do you look at people who are disobedient? If your worth comes from being obedient, how do you look at people who are disobedient? What happens to you when you're disobedient? How do you see yourself? If that is what is giving you meaning and purpose. Christianity is radically different from every other religion in this sense. When God looks at you, he doesn't say, I love you because you're good. He doesn't say, I hate you because you're bad. He says, I already know all about you, and not just from today. I know you hate your job. I know you don't have many friends. I know you feel uncoordinated. I know you don't feel as wonderful as everybody else. I know all about you, and I love you. And I think you're the greatest thing since spice racks. I don't think God actually compares us to spice racks, but you see how transformative this is. This isn't God saying, I love you from afar. This isn't like a career that says I can make you feel successful. This isn't like a relationship that ends in death. God knows all about you, the depth of your heart, more than you know yourself. And he loves you so much that he sent his only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. See, every other purpose in life, every other thing we can live for, if you get it, it will never fulfill you. It'll just leave you empty. And if you fail it, it'll just keep on punishing you. If you live for a career and you fail it, your career won't forgive you. It just keeps on punishing you and punishing you for not getting it. If you find your purpose in Jesus, then if you get him, he fulfills you completely. And if you fail him, he's died on a cross to forgive you. You see how relevant this is for day-to-day life. You see how relevant this is for all of our life. One more thing, and then I'm done. If you center your life on Jesus, don't do it because it's good. Don't do it because it's going to help you, because it's going to free you from your other idols. Don't do it because it's good. Do it because it's true. Because if it's not true, then it's not good at all. It's living for a lie. C.S. Lewis puts it like this. If you're going to follow Jesus, you should follow him not because he's relevant, though he is. Not because he's fulfilling, though he is. Not because he's enjoyable or he'll change your life, though he will. But because he's true. Because he actually is who he says he is. This is not just wishful thinking. It's the truth. It's the truth that takes our fears and reservations seriously. That gives us an identity that won't crush us. An identity that's based on grace and available to all. A way of doing justice that's not inconsistent. A view of sex that doesn't lead to loneliness. Hope that never disappoints. That's what the resurrection is. Hope that never disappoints. Meaning that suffering can't take away. An experience of love without having to hide who you really are. How could it be more relevant than that? What is more relevant than that? It's true. It's relevant. It's real. One of the ways that we know it's true is because it's so relevant, because it explains so much of the human condition. And it is so, so relevant for the simple fact that it's true. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we praise you that you have loved us so much that you have sent your Son to die for us. We thank you that your word is true, that it's real, that it's relevant, that it shapes our everyday life. It's not just pie in the sky when we die, but it's so much more than that. It's so much more for us now to help us to live rightly. That helps us in our work, in our relationships, in our day-to-day life. We pray, Father, that it would be transformative for us, that we would live shaped by the gospel, knowing its truth, knowing its relevance. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. We have some time for questions and answers, so if anyone's got any question, feel free to put up your hand. Either I explained it well or it wasn't really relevant. The wicked mother goddess. Yeah, it's kind of a generic, like, you know how some people worship Mother Earth?
Gaia.
Or the mother goddess. There's a couple names for her, I guess. And it's pretty wicked because, like, there's so many natural disasters that she gives us. Yeah.
With the evil mother goddess again, there's two main gods that ancient Celtic people worship. One was the god of the sun, and the other one was the god of the dead. And I see with some sort of Celtic Welsh kids hanging around the city, and they sort of like worship the god of the dead. You know, with their attire, with their hair, with their piercings, with their tattoos. I saw this young teenage boy yesterday, and he looks like sort of Welsh background. Right? His hoodie, at the back of it, it says, excuse the language, hate female sexual part, chug whiskey, and praise Satan.
Wow.
And I was going, I couldn't sleep last night.
Wow.
I couldn't sleep. I'm still sort of, that's why I went to church today.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for coming. I mean, there's people worship all sorts of things, don't they? Whether it's a named God or an unnamed God, as you see in what they wear and what they do and what they spend their time in and their hopes and dreams. Yeah, and I think that God and the wicked mother goddess, they all have in common justification by works. You have to do good to appease the God, and either you will, and then you look down on everyone who doesn't, or you won't, and you'll be crushed. But Christianity is completely different in that when God looks at us, our worth is because of what Jesus has done for us. So we're humbled to the dust and we're humbled before others, but we're affirmed to the sky at the same time. We're not kind of left in despair. Yeah. Thanks for your comment. Any other questions? Xavier.
Not really a question. Just more comment. So in today's world, you know how many marriages fall apart? That's because, because God's love is so strong it never fails, but in today's world, people don't, in marriages, they love each other rather than God. So, and then when, say their love weakens in each other and the marriage fails, it's just a comment. But it's that reason why I say marriages are so, weak and struggling, because it's very central point, like a God, where to serve and...
Yeah, yep. So I think so. So I think one of the reasons that so many the reason that a lot marriages fail, I think, is sin. So it's either people who make their marriage their God, and so they crush their spouse with the weight of expectation. Like if I try and get my meaning and sense of purpose from Beck, that weight of expectation will just crush her. I need to get that from God. And it doesn't necessarily have to be their spouse that is their God. It could be anything. You could be so driven by work. That could be you need your career to get fulfillment, and so therefore you neglect your marriage. You don't have time with your wife, and you hear stories about that where, a wife has an affair and the husband is somewhat to blame for never being there for her. Like, obviously not completely to blame, but yeah. So it's for not seeing the marriage as the good gift that it is, but either, too high or too little a view of it. Yep, Roland. Mm. 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 Yeah. So I tried to touch on that a little bit at the end. So I understand the objection. People kind of feel like it's irrelevant for life. You don't need it to do good. I suggested that it's it's the worldview that takes our fears and reservations seriously. So like atheism, when someone dies, the problem of evil and suffering, you just get over it. There's no comfort, there's no solace. You can't call out to anyone for the simple reason no one's there. It gives you an identity that doesn't crush you. So other views give you identity in certain things that if you don't live up to it, it'll crush you. That's justification by works, and if you don't work, you get crushed. It gives you an identity that's based on grace and open to everyone. So if what's important to you is being a great lawyer, not everyone can be a lawyer. If what's important to you is, having a romantic relationship, not everyone does or can or has one. He gives us a way of doing justice without being inconsistent. So a lot of people want to do justice. Like there's a lot of atheists that are very keen to end world poverty, right? Make poverty history. That's not a solely Christian thing. But it's kind of a little bit inconsistent to say this is what justice is when there's no basis for doing it. And I think we can press people on saying it's great that you're wanting to do this thing. Why are you doing it? Why is this a good thing and not a bad thing? Why not do it? It gives us a view of sex that doesn't lead to loneliness. So that's, I think, one of the things our culture has confused is our view of sex. And the Christian view has a very high view of sex. It's not just an appetite, and it's not just a kind of a bodily function, but it gives us a view of sex that keeps it from marriage so we're not left in loneliness the morning after. It gives us hope that isn't disappointed. So a lot of other views, cultures can really be described as what is the city's hopes. And they're off, or the group, the culture, what are they hoping in? And they're always disappointed. They're always circumstantial. They're always, we hope for this, and if it doesn't happen, our hopes are dashed. Christianity gives you a hope that can never be disappointed. That's what the resurrection is. And it gives us meaning that suffering can't take away. Suffering can take away kind of anything else that you put your meaning or purpose in, except if your meaning is in being a child of God, then suffering should only push you closer towards Him, not tear you from Him. And it gives us an experience of love without hiding who we really are. So we long for love, we crave it, it's what we sing about, but it's quite often superficial. We can only kind of get so far. We want to hide our faults from the other person because we're afraid we'll be rejected. But God, you can't hide anything from Him. He's seen it all. And He is the one who loves us, despite all our failings and our sin. So I would suggest, how is Christianity relevant for life? The empirical evidence. Well, it takes our fears and reservations seriously. It gives us an identity that won't crush us, an identity that's based on grace, open to everyone, a way of doing justice that's not inconsistent, a view of sex that doesn't lead to loneliness, hope that never disappoints, meaning that suffering can't take away, and an experience of love without hiding who we are. Now, most people, when they hear all that, they'll say, well, that's great, I just don't believe it. So I think once you kind of answer the personal aspect of it, then you can move to the intellectual. So I think there's good answers to a lot of people's questions and reservations why they don't believe. That's why we're doing this series. But quite often people won't hear you for that objection that you've raised. They just see it's not relevant. So when you show them how it is relevant, how it's good, how it shapes your whole life so well, people might be interested in hearing answers to the objections, their defeated beliefs, the things they believe that defeat Christianity, so to speak. Does that make sense? I'm going to be talking a lot more about this on the last talk, Religion is Man-Made. I'm going to be talking about the social and the intellectual and the personal reasons why people believe what they believe, whatever it is. Jonathan?
So pretty much you just said that there is a lot of politics when you see what Christianity brings to life. Right? But I guess it's pretty much a guess. All atheists know that there is a lot of problems in the world, and they just have accepted. They say, okay, there's bad and good, and we'll just make the most out of it. So yeah, so they just kind of don't care. They just assume that's the way to go, and they are happy in a way to just go with the flow.
Yeah, I'm sure they're very happy to say that. And I don't want to call them a liar, maybe especially to their face. But I mean, the empirical evidence is everyone prays as the plane goes down. We just do, right? I mean, when people, so I've debated with a lot of atheists that say that they kind of take pride in the fact that they're not scared about suffering, or they don't have to cry out to some God that doesn't exist. But the fact is, when people really suffer, when people are at the brink of death, they really do reach out for something else. They like. I feel it's so true that we all know it. And I think Paul suggests that in Romans 1. We all have a knowledge of God that we've suppressed. And we've suppressed and we've suppressed to the point where it's beyond our self-consciousness. So consciously we say there's no God, but it always bubbles up at a time of crisis. So people may have convinced themselves of that, but I just don't think it holds up. I think everyone is really scared of death. Everyone is really scared of losing a loved one. And rightly so. And so, when people kind of say they're happy in their atheism, well, some things make them unhappy. Why? I suggest Christianity has explanatory power for the things that make us happy, unhappy, whereas other worldviews, and atheistic worldviews in particular, really struggle.